This is Yair Davidiy from Brit-Am, speaking to you from Jerusalem on behalf of Brit-Am movement of the 10 tribes of Israel. The subject of our talk today is Dan, the tribe of Dan, the Israelite tribe of Dan. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization and with us, we believe that the lost 10 tribes of Israel as recognizable entities are now to be found amongst Western peoples. We have proven this from the Bible, from biblical sources, from rabbinical sources, and from secular sources such as archaeology, history, linguistics, mythology, and almost every field that is somehow or other pertinent to the subject. That is what we stand for, that is what we believe in. So one of the Israelite tribes was the tribe of Dan. On other talks of ours we have spoken of the tribe of Dan. We've discussed him at quite some length. And those of you who are interested should also, in addition to this present talk, should look at our other talks on the subject, because now we are coming to add a little bit extra to our overall picture of what the tribe of Dan was and what we may learn from it. What we may learn from him and from who he was. Dan was one of the tribes of Israel. Dan is also associated with the future redemption or the future liberation of the tribes of Israel, for the return or reunification of the tribes of Israel altogether. As it says in Ezekiel chapter 37, describes how Judah, the present day Jews, will eventually reunite with the 10 tribes of Israel. The 10 tribes of Israel will become one. They will become one entity in the land of Israel, and they will be ruled by one Messiah, future Messiah, descendant of David, king of Israel. This is in the future. In the meantime, what exactly has to be done is not 100% certain, but what we do know for sure is that the identity, the present day identity of the tribes of Israel and their local location and their location in Western areas of the world amongst Western peoples, this is what should be made known, this is what has been revealed, and this is what has to be discussed and researched. And this is what we are doing. This is one of the things what we are doing, and now we are discussing the tribe of Dan. Dan was one of the tribes of Israel. He was the son of Jacob, and Bilhah was the maidservant of Rachel. Rachel and Leah were sisters. They were the two major wives of Jacob. Jacob is also known as Israel. Jacob and Israel are one and the same person in the Bible. Jacob was renamed Israel, so that the two names are synonymous, Jacob and Israel. And Israel had 12 sons. From these 12 sons came the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes from 12 women. His two major wives were, as we said, were Rachel and Leah. Rachel had a maidservant called Bilhah, from whom Jacob also bore children. And Leah had a maidservant called Zilpah, from whom too Jacob bore children. And these the children of Bilhah and Zilpah are often referred to as the sons of the maidservants, as distinct from the sons of the matriarchs, Rachel and Leah. And there are differences in their status, differences in the future, in their future relationships, and their roles that they will play in their coming development and the future revelation of biblical prophecy and the future redemption of the Israelite peoples. Each and every tribe has its own task to play. Each and every tribe has its own destiny, and each and every tribe somehow or other fits into the whole teamwork structure that the tribes of Israel will be required to fulfill in order to realize their potential, the potential that was given unto them by the God Almighty, and the task which is laid upon them by divine providence, by the Bible, by biblical directions, that will eventually lead to the redemption of the tribes of Israel, their reunification with Judah, and the liberation and the biblical redemption of the whole world, of all the peoples of the world. What is good for the Israelite tribes is good for the world, is good for all the peoples of the world. Do not be mistaken, that is what the God of Israel wants. The God of Israel is a God of the world. And the God of the world, the creator of the universe, has so decided to reveal himself through the tribes of Israel. God reveals himself through Israel, through the Israelite tribes. And we have one of the tribes, which, and not the least important, one of the tribes, and possibly one of the most interesting tribes, is the tribe of Dan. This present article that we are speaking to you about relies in part on an article in Hebrew that was written by Rabbi Baruch Efrati, and it was named as Dan Ben Yaakov Kavim Mitemuto, and it is we have a policy that whenever we take a source from anywhere else or use a source, that we recognize the source and we attribute the source, because this is a commandment that of Jewish tradition that we try to adhere to. The tribe of Dan, when it came out of Egypt with the rest of the children of Israel, all of the tribes of Israel came out of Egypt. They were enslaved in Egypt, and then they were liberated by Moses. Under Moses, they were liberated by God through the direction of Moses. And the 12 tribes came out of Israel. The two most popular tribes, the two tribes that had the most people were Judah and Dan. As we see in Numbers chapter 2, Dan had 62,700 males between the ages of 20 and 60. And this is interesting because originally, when Dan was still a young man, when Dan was alone, when Dan was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, Dan is recorded as having had only one child, known as Shukim or Hushim. His name has different variations on it. Whereas the other tribes had several sons. So for instance, Benjamin had 10 sons, and each of the other tribes had several sons. Dan had only one. But even so, when they came out of Egypt, Dan was the second most populous, the second most numerous tribe. So we sometimes see that things are not always as they seem, and sometimes what is small now becomes big later, and vice versa. And this is a thing we see in everyday life and everyday existence, and it's also recorded in the Bible. A famous commentator on the Bible said that Dan and Judah were the two most formidable tribes amongst the tribes of Israel. They were the best fighters. We had, according to the book of Numbers in chapter 2 and elsewhere, tells us that when the tribes of Israel went forward in their marching through the wilderness, Judah went first and Dan went at the end. Why? Because Judah was there to confront any potential enemies, and Dan was there to protect the rear guard, to protect them unless anyone should attack them. The front and the rear were the two most vulnerable sections of the encampment of the marching order, and therefore the two best fighting tribes, the true best fighting sources, the two best fighting forces were placed in the most vulnerable positions. That is why Dan was set up there to protect the rear guard. That is the opinion of Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, a great commentator, who incidentally was killed in England in the Middle Ages. And so here we have Dan in the rear guard, Judah at the front, and we find throughout history, not only in the biblical areas, but through biblical sources, but also in secular sources, that Dan and Judah were frequently connected, they were frequently linked. In the Bible we have Judah is described as a lion's whelp, the son of a lion. In Genesis 49 it says, chapter 49 verse 9, Genesis, Judah is a lion's son. From the plain, my son, you have gone up, he bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? Similarly, we find in Deuteronomy chapter 49 verse 2, and of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. Dan is the son of a lion. He shall leap from Bashan. So we find here that both Dan and Judah are compared to the son of a lion. Later on, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they built a tabernacle, which was the forerunner of the temple. Was the outline, as if to say, of the future temple was the tabernacle, and the tabernacle was built under the direction of Bezalel from the tribe of Judah, and also Oholiab from the tribe of Dan. These were the two major craftsmen, master craftsmen, overseers of the work for constructing the tabernacle in the wilderness. Later we have Solomon, King Solomon from the tribe of Judah. King Solomon built the temple. But who did he set over his work to oversee it and make sure that everything was done properly as he wanted it to be done? A person called Hiram, was a citizen of Tyre, the Phoenician city of Tyre, but he was from the tribe of Dan, as may be seen in 1 Kings chapter 7 verse 13. And therefore we have this connection, this linkage between Dan and Judah, and also in when we find the tribes of Israel moving as the lost tribes through Central Asia into what is now Scythia, what was then Scythia, now the southern area of Russia and Central Europe and so on, and through that area to the north into Northern Europe. We find a frequent association of elements from Judah with Dan. Most of Judah remained with it amongst the present-day Jews, but there were offshoots from Judah that also joined the lost 10 tribes, and some of these offshoots somehow or other attached themselves to Dan. One of them was the Jutes who together with the Angles and Saxons participated in the invasion of England. They came from Denmark, and even now the major section of Denmark is known as Jutland, or the land of the Jutes, and the Jutes came from the tribe of Judah. And we have other elements also in Ireland, where the elements from Judah who attach themselves to Dan, to the Tuatha De Danann, from those elements of the tribe of Dan who settled in Ireland. And so too we have the idea that in the future Dan and Judah will help bring about in future ages the revelation of the divine presence in the world and the redemption of all the Israelite tribes. The rabbinical tradition as given to us by the Targum Yonatan on Genesis 49:18 says that both Dan and Judah have a sense of national responsibility and a noblesse oblige. They have an innate recognition of a national obligation to help all of the tribes of Israel, to bring forward, to promote the cause of Israelite redemption, both for themselves, for their own tribes, and for the rest of the tribes of Israel. We have a future Messiah, son of David, from the tribe of Judah, who will come and redeem all of the Israelite tribes and also the world. That is what we're waiting for. He will bring on the millennium. And he is mentioned throughout the Bible. One of the major passages in which this son of David, Messiah, son of David, is mentioned is in Ezekiel 37, where he describes the reunification of Judah and Joseph. In other words, of the 10 tribes with Judah. The 10 tribes are known as Joseph because Joseph was the major tribe amongst the 10 tribes. Joseph was divided into Ephraim and Manasseh. And the eventual reunification between Joseph, between the 10 tribes and Judah, will be brought about partly not only through the work of the Messiah, son of David, but also through our Messiah, son of Joseph, who will be from the tribe of Joseph, probably from the tribe of Ephraim. The Messiah, son of Joseph, will prepare the way for the Messiah, son of David. The Messiah, son of Joseph, will be descendant of Ephraim. He will lead the 10 tribes in the end times. He will defeat the enemies of Israel. He will defeat Edom, meaning European and other powers. And he will rescue the Jewish people and the other Israelite tribes. He will initiate the reconciliation of the 10 tribes with Judah. The Messiah, son of Joseph, also represents, in a spiritual sense, in a mystical sense, he represents the physical aspects of redemption. Whereas the Messiah, son of David, more represents the physical aspects, even though the two aspects, the two different facets of reality interlocked with each other, and they're reflections of each other, and eventually they will reunite. And this is also reflected. This is reflected in the eventual reunification of Judah with Joseph. But we also have Dan. Where does Dan fit into all this? So Rabbi Avram, a Kohen Cook, he was the first rabbi of Israel. He was a very important rabbi, not only because of the position he held, which was also important, because of the leadership he gave to the early Zionist enterprise and the inspiration that he gave, but also because of his writings, because of his doctrines and teachings. And even now, most of the national religious groups in Israel, the religious Zionists in Israel and throughout the world, they're inspired and learn a lot from the teachings of Rabbi Cook. He is still their source, their ideological source, and their guide, as if to say, in what they do. And his works are very important. So he mentioned the tribe of Dan. He said that Dan, as we see in Samson, the judge of Israel, the superhero, the great, mighty, very strong person named as Samson in the book of Judges, who was from the tribe of Dan. He represents the aspect of physical strength, sanctified for a higher purpose. And this is what the tribe of Dan is. Dan represents physical strength, dedicated to a higher purpose. In Israel, the tribes of Israel will have need of this quality in the end times. And as we mentioned, we in this article we're directed in part by the writings of Rabbi Baruch Efrati. Rabbi Baruch Efrati, he gives sources to the concerning Dan, and he pointed out that Dan actually was born in such a way that you could say that by virtue of him being born, Joseph came into being. We have the two major wives of Jacob were Leah and Rachel. Leah had children at the beginning. Rachel did not have any children. So Rachel wanted to have children, but she thought, as was the way of thinking in that time, that if she would give her maidservant to Jacob, so that Jacob should beget children through Bilhah, that she too would merit to have children of her own. So she gave Bilhah to Jacob. Bilhah was the maidservant of Rachel, and Jacob through Bilhah begat Dan. Dan was born, as seen in Genesis chapter 30, verses 3 to 7. And after Dan, Naphtali. Naphtali is the brother of Dan. And later, Rachel gave birth to Joseph, and she gave birth to Benjamin. In a sense, you could say that by virtue of Rachel having given Bilhah to Jacob and Dan and Naphtali being born, Rachel eventually gave birth to Joseph. This is how the Bible relates it. This is a simple meaning of the Bible, a simple sense of import that you would receive from reading the Bible all the way through. This is what you understand it to be saying. So, in a sense, Dan came into existence, and he paved the way for Joseph to come. So too in the future redemption of the tribes of Israel, and the future appearance of the tribe of the Messiah, son of Joseph, will be enabled, will be through the emissary and through the assistance of the tribe of Dan will give to this process. Dan, in a sense, will prepare the way. Dan is a pathfinder. Dan will enable the tribes of Joseph, the 10 tribes, to realize who they are, to return to their sources. He will prepare the way for the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of Joseph, will complete the process of enabling all of the 10 tribes of Israel to return to the land of Israel, to defeat their enemies, and to reunite and become one people together with Judah, meaning the Jewish people. The Jewish people and the 10 tribes of Israel will be one nation under one king in the land of Israel in the future times. And this in part will be due to the exertions and the participation of the tribe of Dan. Thank you very much. This is Yair Davidiy from Jerusalem, the capital of the tribe of Israel, speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am movement of the 10 tribes of Israel. Thank you.